We thank you so very much for coming. We know you're going to enjoy this evening. And to introduce our special guest, will you please welcome Professor Rob Freer.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to the Anderson Malcolm family, our sponsor, Dean Ann Zamora, and to the College of the Arts for allowing the music department to host an evening in this important speaker series. I teach a class called The Business of Music, and my job is to give students information on how to build a career. Stephanie Matthews is the poster child for career building. She has excelled in every aspect of the music business. Producer? Yeah. Music director? Yes. Arranger and orchestrator? Yes. Performer? Absolutely. I think she'll probably tell you what she did this afternoon. Contractor? Yes. And my favorite, entrepreneurial spirit. To the stars and back. She is just, wow. Stephanie exemplifies the skills a musician needs to succeed in the 21st century. I hope you enjoy this story of accomplishment and that it inspires you. Students, visitors, and my fellow lovers of music and success, Ms. Stephanie Matthews.
Good evening to everyone. It's good to see everybody's faces. That was quite the introduction. I'm like the poster child of entrepreneurship. So I'm Stephanie Matthews. I am a violinist. And I just want to talk a little bit about what even got me into music and my love for music. So my dad, first of all, I'm birthday twins with my dad. So we're very, very close. And I just remember like my earliest memories with my dad was listening to classical music. It's literally the only kind of music he ever listens to, ever. So, I mean, talking about driving to the grocery store or him picking me up from school and like going to a business meeting, anything, was listening to classical music in the car with him. And I fell in love with the music. I just, and then the more you learn about radio and airplay, which without getting into the business aspect of that, but just, you start hearing the same songs on the radio. So I started recognizing certain symphonies or certain like sonatas, certain solo pieces, without even really thinking about that. And I remember I was a toddler at the time, but I had seen a show on a public access station, probably PBS or something like that. And I saw a performance that absolutely blew me away. So as I got older, I dug in the archives to figure out what that recording was, and I bought it on vinyl. But it was and I'm going to date myself, it was a 1983 performance by Pinchas Zuckerman, who's a very famous violinist, performing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto with the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. And I was just like totally blown away, like glued to the television, like I want to do that. When I tell you, like, mesmerized. And, with kids, I wanted to be a ballerina at one point. I'm sure I wanted to, like, have a horse and have a pet monkey or whatever. But there was something about this in particular that stuck to my ribs. And I begged my parents for about a year before they got me into, like, group lessons. And then I started taking private lessons. So I started in the public school system, like a lot of kids. I didn't go to like a fancy private school or anything like that. And so I was exposed to the music programs that were available at my school. And I grew up going to church. So I participated in like the church choir and some of the other musical opportunities affiliated with my church. And sometimes, they would have like Easter performances and they would like have the children's services and allow us to display our talent, so to say. But I would say that it was probably around the time that I was about 5 or so that one of the teachers I was working with told my parents, you should probably consider putting her into private lessons. Seriously, because it was just something that I loved. Now, I didn't love practicing, so let's start there. I think people think that because you're like a musician, like you love to practice. It's like love doing homework. No. I think the love comes after you start seeing the gains that you, you know, from the practice and the improvement and getting better. And I'm very competitive. That I've always been as a kid. Participated in sports and, you know, played soccer when I was in grade school and then also like high school. But it was something about music. And I grew up in the DC metro area. So grew up in Maryland. My parents still live in Maryland. And I joined the DC Youth Orchestra program when I was probably about 7 years old. In that program, they had, you know, you could audition for different seats in the orchestra. They have varying orchestras that you audition into according to your level. They offer private lessons with some of the teachers that are there. And that's when I started being able to be in chamber groups with other kids at my playing level and auditioning for orchestra chairs, which was like brought out the competitive side because you're like, I gotta get the higher chair. And also just getting more exposure to like the kind of orchestra repertoire and working under a conductor. And some of these conductors went on to have very, very thriving careers. Like Michael Morgan, who passed away fairly recently, was one of my first conductors with the DC Youth Orchestra program. From there, I started, my parents enrolled me at the Levine School of Music, which is also based in DC. It's actually really close to Duke Ellington High School for the Arts. So the Levine kids were for the like, what you would consider like the Western classical, and then Duke Ellington was the kids who were going more into the jazz field. And I was always surrounded by the arts and the music, and then eventually started competing. So in regional competitions, they had competitions through DC Youth Orchestra program, where we also, my first tour was with DC Youth Orchestra program. My first trip to New York City was with the DC Youth Orchestra program. And they had recitals, they had regional competitions where you could win, you know, a few $100s, I think upwards of maybe like a couple $1,000s. And for a kid, that's like, you hit jackpot. So there was definitely incentive there. But to backtrack a little bit, this was always extracurricular growing up. So I had, you know, my public school was for arts and math magnet. Then when I started going into middle and high school, I was testing into science and technology programs. So I was on the life sciences track at my high school, and my field of study was going to take me into the biochemistry track. And I remember when I started working with my private teacher, this is after graduating essentially out of the DC Youth Orchestra program, and entering into the National Symphony Orchestra Youth Fellowship program, which I had auditioned into, which is open to high schoolers only. So I started working with a really wonderful teacher there. He's retired now, been retired for a few years, but he said, you know, you should really think about going into music professionally. And to be completely honest with you, I was not sure that I wanted to do that because I didn't see anyone that had the kind of career that I wanted. As much as I loved orchestra, I couldn't see myself in a traditional symphony orchestra. I loved chamber music, like piano trios, string quartets. I could do that all the day long. But again, I didn't know anyone at that time that had that career that I could say, oh, I could do that too. And so it seemed like kind of like a very far, far away notion for me. And ultimately, I'm like, I don't want to be broke. Like, you hear all these stories about struggling musicians, and it's a real thing. Okay, that's another talk for another day. But you know, I've always been like a realist, and my parents have always been drilling hard on, you know, academics first. So, you know, I was just like, I don't know that going into music is going to be the route. So I decided to go into my undergraduate program pursuing biochemistry and molecular biology. I was a biochem molec bio major. And I went to University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I was on full scholarship, so my tuition was completely paid for, and I got a salary or a stipend per semester for research because I was going into the MD PhD track. And there was a day, this moment, the pivotal moment, where I got a call from someone from my church who I'd known for years, and her daughter was getting married. She said that she wanted me to perform at the wedding, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's easy. So I was, gonna play a piece that I had been playing for years at that point. So kind of like you pull it out the back pocket and do the thing, and it's great. And I remember at that point, I hadn't touched my instrument probably in about a full year, in 2 semesters' time. I hadn't touched my instrument. Because again, the program was very rigorous. And I remember taking my instrument out and trying to play through the piece, and I literally, not only could I not recall it for memory, and I've never had an issue with memory, but it was like, physically, it was foreign to my body. And I had truly like an emotional breakdown. And I remember at that, I was erratic. I definitely started crying. Got in my car, which I do not recommend if you're having an emotional breakdown. Don't do that. And I was like, literally just like driving off campus. I called my dad, like just in tears and probably screaming over the phone. And he was like, okay, wait, I don't know what's going on. Are you okay? And then I'm like talking through it, just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know that I can do this. I don't know. And then fortunately, he was able to really just kind of like get down to the bottom line of, so what do you want to do? And for me, it was a crossroads because I knew what was required on both sides. Being very competitive in music, I know I had seen from going through the various competitions and the various practice, and also a lot of my friends who, we were kind of like running with the pack, who were now at Juilliard and at Curtis, and I knew what it took. And I also knew what it took on this other side, so I'm like, if I really had to put all of my eggs in one basket at this point, I have to go music, because I can't wonder, and I can't feel like this is not gonna work. I can't see myself in a lab for the next 30 years. And it scared me because I'm like, that's exactly where I'm headed. So he was like, if this is what you want to do, truly, I will support you 100%, but it has to be your decision. And I'm really grateful for that because I know a lot of people who don't necessarily have or feel like they have that kind of support from their family. And so I don't take that lightly. And so I decided in that moment that I was going to withdraw from my scholarship, withdraw from the university, and beg my teacher, who had told me to go into music in the first place, to take me back as a student and get me ready for auditions. And he did, graciously. I mean, with the side I told you so, but he did. And so that kind of got me redirected professionally. That was the moment. And it was really interesting because I felt like in a lot of ways, because it was my decision, I had to own the work that I was willing to put in to get there. So that meant, again, like not having touched my instrument and understanding that I had to get myself to a competitive level to compete and enter these very competitive undergraduate programs with people who had been working up until. So we're talking 8-hour days of practice. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. 8-hour days, period. There was not an excuse. Not 7.5 hours, not 7 3/4 hours. And that was, I had never put in that kind of work. And so like finally getting closer and closer to audition days, there were 2 schools whose deadlines hadn't passed at that point. So I really wanted to go to New York, but the Juilliard audition had already passed. So I was looking at Indiana University and Curtis Institute of Music. 2 very highly competitive schools for anyone who may know the schools that I'm talking about. And so I made finals at Curtis, and then, but I didn't get entry. They only took 2 students that year. And then I got in at Indiana. So I did my undergrad at Indiana University, graduated from IU, and ended up going to grad school in New York at the Juilliard School. Now, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit because being in Indiana for me was really isolating because it was a culture shock. Like coming from the DC metro area and then living in southern Indiana was really different. And it really forced me to dig deep in ways that I hadn't before. I was not super close to home. I didn't have any family nearby. I didn't really have any friends. A lot of the students that were at IU grew up kind of in the area. Of course, there were kids that came for like the Kelley School of Business and things like that, but it wasn't like it was a school where I knew a lot of people. So I was kind of starting from scratch in a lot of ways. And then I had already put in time at another school, so I was a transfer. So I was older in first year classes. So that was also a little bit of a adjustment period for me. But going through the academic portion of it was rigorous. And I had a teacher that was not super supportive, which was also presented as challenges. And, you know, again, it was one of those moments where it's like I had to keep reminding myself, why am I here? Do I want to be here? And what is my bottom line? And so it was as challenging as it was. And raise your hands if we have any music majors in here. Do we have any? Okay, awesome. Okay, so you do understand, like, your private teacher is like kind of king. Like there's so many, right? There's so many credit hours that are tied up with this person, you know? And this is the person that's basically going to vouch for you and your ability. So I had to like go through this process, ended up having to transfer studios, which meant that I had to at that point go to the dean of the school, which again, I was terrified because I had never had to deal with anything like that by myself. Ended up switching studios. And so again, just in my mind, I'm just like, what is my bottom line? What is my bottom line? I wanted to get to New York. I wanted to get to the Juilliard School. And, you know, so I knew that I just had to like focus and put in the work. Now, because of all of the time that I spent in my undergraduate study, so literally leaving a year and a half in biochem and research and all of the work that goes into that, switching gears, prepping for a complete shift in mindset to go into music, and then being in school for 3 years plus first and second summer sessions. I was literally in school without a break for about, I think at that point it was probably about 5.5 years or so. So I was starting to really hit burnout, like full-blown academic burnout. I remember towards the end of my undergraduate program, I had learned of the Sphinx competition, which is a competition that's open to Black and Latinx string players, because their mission was to increase the numbers and representation of Black and Latinx musicians in professional orchestras at that point. I had heard about this competition, and my teacher was like, you should compete. Like, I think you're ready to go for it. Let's do it. So prepared for that. The competition happens in Detroit. So another student at the time was driving up, so I ended up driving with her and her mom. And after the competition, I made semifinals, but I didn't place. We were getting ready to head back, and there was a show at the Fox Theater in Detroit. And two of like my favorite artists at the time were performing. So it was Floetry, who was opening up for Erykah Badu. So I was like, I want to go to that show. And we were wearing like gala black, because that's what we had to wear for the reception to the competition finals. And so I'm like, we're dressed, I have my instrument, like, I wonder if we could like sneak backstage and say like, we're supposed to be on the show. Again, I don't advocate lying. I'm just telling my story. Okay. So we had the grand idea of literally getting our instruments and finding the stage door, and like we were kind of like rushing and like, oh hi, sorry we're late. Where's the dressing rooms? Like we're supposed to be on for the next set. And again, without thinking about it, they like took us to the dressing rooms. So we're just looking at each other like, is this happening? This is crazy. Of course, we ended up getting kicked out. They were like, we definitely don't have strings on this show. You tried it. But we were able to meet some of the bands, some of the background singers, and they were just like, y'all play like violin, you play violin, that's like super cool. And I had seen they had like a tour itinerary. I saw that they were gonna be in Indianapolis the next night at Murat Theater. I was at IU at the time. So I said, you know what? I'm gonna go to that show at Murat Theater and see if I can meet one of the artists. And so I did. I was a very, very broke college kid. And I drove on I think the last little bit of money I had in my account, I put into gas. So when I got there, and I think it was like parking was $15, I did not have it. So I locked my wheel really hard, and I was like, I really hope if they tow me, they'll have to wait till everybody goes home so I don't hit the next car. Again, just, too much going on there. But the tour buses were parked in the back, and I had brought copies of my audition CD that I was going to submit for grad school. Because at that time, this was like at the end of my undergraduate program at IU. So I had to submit already for various schools for grad school. So I literally took my grad school audition tapes and made like 6 copies. So my friend, her name is Shelby, I was like, do you have anything? I literally made copies so I could give them samples of my playing, because I didn't have any sort of portfolio at that time to give them. Certainly nothing that I thought would be, on par with the style of the genre. I mean, this was concerto rep, Paganini caprices, sonatas. I was like, I don't know if they care about that, but at least they'll hear how I play. And she didn't bring anything, so I was like, I'll just take 3. And I'll take 3, maybe they won't know the difference. And so I'm just, again, it plays a role. It plays a role, because there's something about this audacity thing that just keeps showing up in my career. But so anyways, I met with one of the girls from Flowetry, Marsha Ambrosius, and she was like, weren't you guys in Detroit? Are you a roadie or something? And I was like, no, I would love to work with you guys. I love your music. I'm a huge fan. So she was like, yeah, we do most of our recording in London, but, I'd love to get your information and see if maybe there's a possibility to work with you. So I gave her what I had. And then I remember Erica's tour bus pulls up, and she was pregnant at the time with Puma. And she walks out, and I'm just like, oh my God, that's Erykah Badu. So she's like, what are you guys doing all the way over there? Because we were sitting on the curb looking very broke and very sad, because we didn't have money to buy tickets to go to the show. And we were just like, oh, we'd love to go to the show. We just don't have money. So we just hoped we got a chance to see you. She got us VIP wristbands to go to the show, front and center. Definitely did not have to do that, but it was very gracious of her. So right before the last song of her set, I was like, we should go to the back and see if we could talk to her and see if we could work with her, because I was obsessed with Erykah Badu. So she was like, I don't know that there's room in our they have a core band. So anyways, she was like, well, do you have any information? I'd love to talk to you if there's an opportunity. One of the guys in her band at the time was working on his debut CD as a solo artist. So he pulls me to the side. He's like, hey, so you play violin, right? So he was like, do you have any samples of your playing? And I had already given it out to Marsha and for the Flowetry girls. So I was like, I don't, but I could send something to you. So he's like, I'm working on a solo project, and I hear strings all over this record. Do you write? And I'm like, yes. But I hadn't written professionally. Going through theory, ear training, counterpoint, all of this stuff. So I was like, surely I'd be able to write something to a record. The audacity. So we exchanged information. He said, listen, send me what you have, and I'll be in touch. I mailed it to him overnight, and he got back to me and was like, I love your playing. I gotta have you on my project. So he flies me, my friend Shelby, and her sister, who at the time, she was playing cello at the time, down to Atlanta to record this record. Now, I talked to a really good friend of mine that I knew from church, and he knew Finale. I had never used Finale like to that degree before, to sync up the playing and to score in that way. I'd done like little projects in school, but I was just like, I really want to make sure that I'm learning this program properly to be able to execute these arrangements. And I remember like writing to him and saying like, hey, do you want to hear like what I wrote? And he was like, nah, well, like, just, I trust you. So now I'm nervous. I'm like, oh, he's gonna think I'm a fraud. I'm gonna get there and he's gonna think I'm an absolute fraud. So anyways, I was literally, I'm talking like, this was like jumping into the deep end at this point. So we get down to Atlanta, and again, like I listened back to those records and like played back those arrangements. I remember playing through the arrangement on my instrument a few times and like recording myself and making sure it was like representative of what I wanted, because this is my first time doing anything like this. So we get in the studio and we record the first song, and at the end of the first take, it's quiet. Like the engineer didn't talk back or anything. So my heart is like beating so fast out of my chest, and I'm like sweating. I'm very nervous. And they were just like, oh my God, that was so good. We love that. Oh my God. So, and at this moment, this was just like, I felt like I could have probably like burst into tears because I was just like a ball of nerves. So anyways, I share that story because this person really was the entry point to my being in the music business the way that I am now. His name is PJ Morton. PJ is a solo artist. He's also a member of the band Maroon 5. And working with PJ on his debut album, the Emotions record, put me on the radar of so many major music directors who at the time were just graduating from Berkeley. A lot of the MDs that work with all of the big artists go through Berkeley. They have a recipe for getting students placed. And I remember a few years later, I did a show with PJ. It was a spot date in Nashville, and there was a guy who was working with Chrisette Michelle, who had been introduced to me, and I really barely recalled the interaction, but he called me and said, "Hey, I got your information from PJ. I'm getting ready to like work on this tour, and I need to have somebody that can write strings." So I was like, okay. I was living in New York at the time. So again, I'd graduated from IU. This is, again, from recording phase to like actual projects, sometimes can take like a year, sometimes a couple of years. So I'm living in New York at the time. I had graduated from my master's program, so it's a 2-year program. So I was in East Harlem. I think I was probably chasing a mouse under my refrigerator. So I was distracted on this phone call, and he was like, I got your number from PJ, and I want somebody on the road with me to write strings. So I was like, yeah, just, give me the information. I'd love to. Sounds great. And again, not really processing all that he was saying, he was getting ready to go on the road with this artist, some hip hop artist I kind of had heard of, but didn't really know their music. And so, I get a call from the tour manager maybe 10, 15 minutes later, like, hey, wanted to get your information to book your flights, book hotel. We're going to, be in LA. And I was just like, whoa, okay, wait a second. Because at the time, I was teaching in New York City public schools. And so I'm like, okay, with tour, I had never, ever in my life been on a tour. So we're talking, up to 6 months, sometimes off and on, sometimes longer than that. So I'm like, how is this gonna work? Like, I'm gonna have to like talk to my principals and talk to these schools and let them know I'm not coming back. So then I call my sister, because I'm like, it just didn't make sense. I'm like, I didn't really know what I was signing up for. So I called her and I was like, okay, I got a call from this guy, and he's saying something about this guy, Kanye West, and this tour, and I feel like I should tell them no. She was like, tell them no, are you crazy? No, you should totally do this tour. So I was like, I don't even really know the artist like that. And she was like, I'm gonna send you music, listen to it now. And she starts like sending all of his records, because I didn't know his music at the time. And he was doing this college tour, so she had actually seen him perform. And so I'm listening to the music and I was just like, oh my God, this guy, I don't know how I'm gonna make this work. Anyways, I ended up having to have the conversation with these schools to say, I'm not coming back because I'm going on tour with Kanye West. And half of them thought I was absolutely lying. And I can't blame them because it was just so, it's even now thinking back, it seems so unlikely. But anyways, that tour was, again, PJ got me in the door. That tour put me on the map. So the music director for that tour is a guy named Adam Blackstone, who is the MD. Has anybody heard of Adam Blackstone or know who he is? Okay, so Adam did this year's Super Bowl halftime show. He did last year's Super Bowl halftime show. He did the Super Bowl halftime show the year before that. He was the MD for the Rihanna performance at the Academy Awards this year. He was the MD for the pit orchestra for Billie Eilish last year at the Academy Awards. I think he's played on pretty much every Grammys that I personally can recall. Every Grammys, my first time doing the Grammys was definitely with Adam. I don't know that there is a major pop artist that he hasn't worked with yet. Someone definitely, if you're into music, look him up, Adam Blackstone. But he was the one who was the MD for this Kanye tour. And then that put me on the map for all these other MDs, working with Jay-Z, working with Beyoncé, working with John Legend. And it's, again, it just seems so far-fetched that it started with the audacity to say, yes, I'm gonna do this, or to make a decision that seemed completely crazy at the time. So I wanted to fast forward a little bit because now, again, I'm a violinist, and I kind of got thrown into arranging sink or swim. I don't do as much arranging now because I hire that work out. I know a lot of very talented arrangers. I'm also a contractor, so I hire strings. I hire not just strings, but also orchestra, hire core band background vocalists. I do a lot of creative consulting for award shows, for music video shoots, for tours. And most recently, I'm the contractor for the string contractor for the Dell residency in Las Vegas. It's been quite the journey to see all of the skills that I've developed, but also all the skills that is necessary to be versatile in this business today. Not 10, 20 years ago, but today. A lot of the people that I interface with are wearers of many hats. I've had to comb through, read, and negotiate contracts, not just for myself, but for other musicians. I'm interfacing with label executives, I'm interfacing with managers, I'm interfacing directly with artists. And it really helped me to perceive that there was so much that it was improbable at that point to learn in school. A lot of it I learned in the doing process. I never went to business school. I don't know if we have any business school majors or anyone pursuing an MBA, but I never went to business school. I didn't take a business course before starting my business. And it really came to me to start my company, StringCandy, which I founded in 2012 in Los Angeles. After having a few different placements, I started getting so many calls, like, oh, we want to get strings on this. We want to get, do you know any string players for this? We're looking for a solo cellist for this. We're looking for a fashion show. We want this look. It got to the point where I was like, there's only one of me. I can't be in like 10 places at one time. And so I was talking to a friend who had started her own company in Phoenix. And she was just like, oh yeah, I can help you file the paperwork. Get a name, I'll help you file the LLC. And I was like, I feel like I don't know how to run a business. I need to learn more. She was like, no, you need to start it, get a name, I'll help you file the paperwork. Full stop. And if I didn't have her to like just like push me, like just do it and start, I'm not sure that I would have, to be completely honest, because the concept of being a business owner was completely lost on me. I'm a musician first. I feel like I've always been a musician first. And musicians are not typically very good at business at all. And so there was a lot that I had to learn. And so I filed the LLC paperwork in April of 2012, and voila, I'm a business owner. But I didn't know what that meant in terms of like developing a business and scaling a business. But I think what has really helped me is my network. Looking at from not just teachers that I've had who have been really influential, but friends, musicians that I've worked with throughout my career who have literally put my name in rooms that I hadn't even entered yet. Because the word of mouth is very powerful. We've heard that cliche, but it's true. And people will advocate for you in ways that you don't necessarily know. And so the way you show up in a space is important, because that literally can be the interview for your next job. You know, you don't know. And even when it came to people who were considered to be my peers, or even like students, like I remember being in school, especially at a school like Juilliard, where Indiana too, any of these schools, like there's so much talent. But I say Juilliard because I was in New York City. There's no lack of talent. I mean, New York is oversaturated with talent. And I remember being in school with some of these like jazz kids. I was a little bit older than them, but John Batiste. We were in school at the same time. John's a little younger than I was. Some of the first projects he did with strings was with my quartet in school. I remember Chris Bowers, like a lot younger than John and also younger than me, who was in Juilliard at the time, jazz pianist, killer pianist. And now Chris is one of these like huge emerging talents in film scoring. And, you know, to be on a scoring stage and to have the composer come out the booth and say, "Oh my God, Steph, what's going on?" And people looking at you like, "How do you know that guy?" It seems unlikely, but one thing that I always want to impart is it's easy to say, I want to get to the big fish. I want to get to the Hans Zimmer, or I want to get to the Beyoncé. And that's not to say you won't get there, but don't neglect your sphere of influence. Because what ends up happening is in the desire and in your goal to get up here, neglecting the guys here can make the process a lot longer for you. Because you don't know who's connected with whom. And as you're building a team, one thing that I'm certainly learning is that these guys up here, they've built a team. They have a team of people that they trust, right? And so when we're kind of in the same, like when I'm with my running pack here, we are building our team. So it's a lot more difficult to get entry into a fixed team than it is to build a team with people who are interested in building a team and in the space to build a team. So you build together, and then you leverage that network and say, you know what? Actually, I know the perfect bass player for you, man. That's actually how PJ got connected with Maroon 5. Adam Blackstone got a call and they were looking for another musician in their band. They said, I know the perfect guy for you. So again, it's like the networking aspect is huge. And it doesn't just pertain to music, but we have so many music majors in the room. I definitely want to stress that. Networking and really showing a genuine interest and admiration for the people that are in shared space is invaluable, truly invaluable. Because people can see when you're being sincere. So I'm not saying, you know, to just kind of like brown nose, but you know, if there are people that you admire and, you know, and if you have an opportunity to be supportive, like show up at their performances, or, you know, if they're looking for a hand on a project or something and you are capable and able to lend assistance, it goes a long way. Because I know for myself, I don't forget that. You know, I don't take that lightly. So I'm going to take a pause a little bit. I don't know where we are on time, but I have a couple of other. Okay, so I talked a little bit about StringCandy. Like I said, I founded StringCandy in 2012, so it's been 11 years, which is, again, crazy to think about. But in starting StringCandy, I met some people who had many questions about just what I was doing and some of the opportunities that I've had. I've never had a manager, so people are like, how did you get to perform this? How did you get to meet Beyonce? How did you get to go on tour with this person or that person? And I don't have an agent or a manager. It was literally my network, my contacts, my personal relationships that has allowed me to get to know either the artist directly, the music directors, the tour managers, or someone in the band who's like, y'all want strings? You gotta call her. And the consistency of being able to show up and deliver is what keeps your name in those conversations until it becomes synonymous. You want strings? Go to StringCandy. You want this? StringCandy. And we're just now hearing branding, brand, but like it was never my intention to do it that way. But now that I understand what the description of the brand is, you are a walking brand. However you show up in a space is your brand, right? And so I'm really grateful to have people in the business who have essentially been mentors, but also just like really stellar peers who are invested in seeing me win. And likewise, I'm invested in seeing them win, and team building and community building. So with that said, I did work for the Sphinx organization for a few years. I was their Director of Artist Development, but prior to that position, I was a tour manager, and then I did like art administrative coordinating for them remotely. And they definitely needed someone who had the network. That's really why they reached out to me for the job. In my role as Director of Artist Development, I was negotiating contracts for the soloist program. So I was managing 33 classical soloists. So all of the junior and senior division winners of the competition and alum that were being placed with Chicago Symphony or in solo engagements with Philly Orchestra, Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore, NSO, LA Phil, you name it. So putting eyes on those contracts and having to actually negotiate those contracts was very informative, to say the least. And also just learning how to use spreadsheets and do all the boring admin stuff that I had never done before. That was a learning curve for me, you know. But it helped me to learn how to organize information and to become faster. In my role, especially when you're hiring so many people, I can't begin to tell you how important it is not to miss deadlines. And also being organized with payroll documents and sensitive information, learning how to exercise discretion, especially when you're dealing with A-list talent, and protected information is very, very, very important in my role. But from that work with the Sphinx organization, I got a call from a young composer, orchestrator, who I, at the time, had only met once, but I was a huge fan of his work. He called me and he said, you know, I have this concept of doing this project, man, and I just wanted to know what you thought about it. And Black Panther had just come out, so we were all like really just wowed by it and inspired. And basically we wanted to put out a concept piece of like, what would the orchestra of Wakanda look and sound like? So we were like, okay, you know, I know Ludwig Göransson, I've actually worked with him, and he's a fabulous composer and a great guy. So I was just like, if we're gonna do this, I feel like it can't just be in a studio. Like, there has to be a visual, because otherwise I think it's not gonna land the same way. Because there has to be a visual of Wakanda. So I said, let's put together an all-black orchestra. And you write the arrangement, we'll reimagine the title track of the movie, which was All the Stars, with Kendrick Lamar and SZA. So we put this orchestra together. Everyone volunteered. We didn't have a budget for it. We had just enough to book the studio, which was the former Avatar Studios, which is now called Power Station in New York City, and was able to kind of finesse travel for Matt Jones, who was coming from Chicago with a couple players, and myself, because I was traveling from Detroit. And we do the session, and the guys in the booth were just like, that gave me chills. And it was such a beautiful moment because, to be completely honest with you, there's so few times in my career where I've been able to collaboratively share space with like all black musicians. One, it's not representative in a lot of the music schools and conservatories, but then also we're just spread out. You know, I have a lot of friends and colleagues that work in admin, that are teachers, that are freelancers, that tour, but to get everyone in one space, it was just like, it was hard to put into words. And so a lot of the musicians were writing us, and we decided to put it out on Vimeo because we did not get clearance from Universal Music to use the backing track. So we got pulled off of YouTube. We couldn't put it on YouTube. It got flagged. But we were able to put it on Vimeo. And I was going to say, I don't know if you had the ability to play it.
Careful, don't let that down.
I know. I'm going to take a lot of my head off. It's only a few minutes. Hopefully this will take us just to the end. We good? So I will say, as they're loading this, we didn't have a name for the group when we conceived of the project. But one of the musicians, it was a violist, came up with the idea of the name Re-Collective, because we were a collective, essentially. But I think the notion of the reconvening of this collective is where we came up with the name, and it just stuck. So you can play it. can talk. It's just gonna roll the credits for the next few seconds. But thank you. Everyone that you saw here volunteered their time. Everyone. So again, I think for me, not just the networking, but the community building, and also just the passion for what we do, has gotten us to that, but also gotten me to where I am professionally. So I just wanted to, I want to thank you guys for being such a welcoming audience. I hope I did not bore you to tears with my story, but hopefully it inspires you to pursue whatever it is that you're dreaming of pursuing, and to have the audacity to do things that may seem unlikely or even scary. But if I can do it, you can do it. Truly. So thank you. That's a great question. So there was really not a lot of routine. So I would say right when I graduated, my first job out of school was teaching. So my routine was, going into these various schools and music programs. I wasn't a teacher with the Department of Education. So these were kind of like third-party organizations that would provide a string program in various charter and public schools in New York City. So that, sometimes I would be in the school like in the morning, sometimes it'd be afternoon, sometimes it'd be after school programs. And then I would be freelancing in between. So if something were to pop up like, oh, I need you to sub on, on this, or we need a violinist because so-and-so got sick, or they, and just New York City freelance scene is a little erratic. So I wouldn't say there was a ton of routine there. But in comparison to what I'm doing now, I am far more organized because I have to be. But also I do a lot of television and film scoring in my day-to-day while I'm here in LA. Currently, for weekends, I've been in Las Vegas because I'm working on the Dell residency. So those shows are Friday and Saturday evenings. I have to be on site to, handle security checks and protocols. I handle a lot of the paperwork with the union. So normally, like, my daily routine is I dedicate like the first part of the morning to paperwork, responding to emails, making sure that nothing gets missed. And then like when I start hitting and that's if I'm not in scoring. Scoring starts at 10 normally on a double. It's like 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a 1 hour lunch where I'm either checking emails or making phone calls. So it really is, because I'm a business owner, my hours are different. It's not like I'm clocking fixed hours. So sometimes it can be a long pull of hours, but then I also have the flexibility to say, oh my God, I'm not gonna take work for the next 2 weeks, I need a break. So I would say my general routine is if I'm not in scoring, like if I'm not on a scoring stage from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., I dedicate the morning to emails and phone calls and just handling paperwork. And then the remainder of the day, I'll actually reach out to musicians if I'm having to contract or hire, or speaking to a client.
You talked about facing burnout and everything during college.
Oh yes.
I would say balancing, I don't know if you were working at that time too, but the ability to stay structured, but then also know when to take a break as well as have a career. I don't know if you were already freelancing a bunch while you were at Juilliard and
Yeah.
Indiana. So
That's a great question. So while at Indiana, I was not working. I was like full-time student. And so any free moment I had, I was in the practice room. And I knew that I had to be. I don't think that, I certainly was not, I didn't have the expectation to relax in that moment because I felt like I was playing catch up, so to say. By the time I got to Juilliard for grad school, I was working. I was working 2 part-time jobs through work study, and then I like maxed out my work study hours. And so one of the assistant deans graciously placed me in touch with Jazz at Lincoln Center, and I was a stage manager for Phil Shop, who is like a jazz legend and a human encyclopedia. But so I was having to balance, and it was not easy, but because it was just a 2-year program, I just, I kind of just had the mindset to barrel through it so that I'll have the breather after the hard 2 years. But I think it's important to know yourself, if I'm being completely honest, because I think there is value in saying, you know what, if I need to take some time away because I need to, I think that's okay. I think you really have to know yourself and like what your threshold is. And speaking to somebody or speaking to like family or like really close friends, even like teachers, somebody that you really trust that can give you sound advice on what that might look like for you, I think is really valuable. I hope that answers your question.
So here's a question. What is more important from Juilliard, the instruction or the network?
Oh, you're trying to get me caught up. So I will say this. I've always been of the mind that when you're looking at schools as an instrumentalist or singer, as a musician, I urge students to go where there's a teacher that wants you there and will push you and can get you to the next level. I think a lot of times people chase a brand name and the reputation of a school, but the reputation is not going to nurture you. It's a reputation, it can be a stamp, but so in short form, I think depending on the teacher or the support system that you have at that school will depend on the quality of instruction that you're going to get on the one-on-one. But the network for me was invaluable. I cannot begin to tell you like what it was like being able to like in a student-led string quartet to perform at the New York Choreographic Institute and have Wynton Marsalis sitting in front row. Unreal. Those kind of experiences are unreal, to be honest. So for me, it was the network, without question. Yes.
What would you say is the best way for an up-and-coming musician to reach out professionally?
That's a great question, because there are good ways and then there are not so good ways. I would say, please fight the urge to reach out to people in like social media DMs. It is a very casual means of communication. So for me personally, that's relegated to like family and close friends. If I don't know you and you're trying to conduct business in my DMs, it doesn't look great. It gives me pause. Especially when I have public information on how to contact me with my email address and links in my bio that can take you to my email addresses and stuff like that. And I think sometimes it can be just like in the excitement or the motivation of a moment, like, oh, I want to reach out and do this cool thing. I think it's important to consider, again, how you're showing up is part of your brand. And when you're interfacing with people you don't know, I think it is important to exercise more caution than not. Because I don't think it would hurt you to exercise caution, but it can hurt you if you don't. So email is generally what is viewed as being a professional means of reaching out. And also be clear in what it is that your ask is, if there's a proposal, or if you're just simply saying like, hey, I want to introduce myself. I went to this performance and, I'm a huge fan of your work, blah, blah, blah. I would love to be connected. Whatever it is, make sure that it is very concise and clear. Because the person you're trying to reach out to is not a mind reader. So the clearer you can be, the better. And if you have any sort of supporting information, whether it's, you have a bio or samples of work that again is in a nice and neat package, that certainly goes a long way too. Because it's oh, this person is organized and they're prepared and they're not going to waste my time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think there was one more.
Oh, sorry.
I did.
I finally got it. No. I suppose kind of an add-on to my earlier question, when it comes outside of work, what do you do to make sure, is there generally an amount of time you try to relegate to yourself, outside of work? And if so, what do you generally like to do with your time outside of work? Is it practicing? Is it meditating, exercise?
That's a great question. And self-care is huge. In a world that kind of I guess, celebrates busyness. And busyness does not mean productive, by the way. I actually really like quiet solitude, personally. So when I'm not working, which when I am working, I'm interfacing with so many people, so many personalities all the time. And so when I do have downtime, I like quiet time for myself. Sometimes it's a matter of, spending time with close friends and family that I don't necessarily get to see often. I usually have to plan that out because, I have to travel to see family mostly. Or even just catching up with good friends and not talking about work. Because I have a lot of friends in the music business, so it's actually dedicating time to be human and have fun and not deal with music or talk about music. Exercising is great. I used to bike a lot. I need to get more into it, but I like driving out to Malibu. I actually like driving. Driving lets me clear my head, sort through my thoughts a little bit. Also quiet time for me. So I think it just really depends on what I feel like I need in the moment, if that makes sense. Sometimes it's I need to get my blood pumping, I need to move, I need to get out and sweat a little bit. And so it's the exercise. And sometimes it's I just need to shut off. I need no one on my phone. I'm putting it on airplane mode and I'm just gonna get some quiet time to myself. So I think it depends. But I would say it's a kind of a mix of those things I talked about. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you all. Thank you.